One of the things I do to lure kids into books is I will do a book talk, just like you've seen me do with several books, including PAX. But one of the things that's kind of the icing on the cake to get them really interested in it is I choose a book, or I choose a part in the book that is going to be suspenseful. It's going to get them a glimpse of the book, but also get them really wanting to read. And so that's where, as a teacher, being a reader comes into play. You have to have read these books. You have to have experienced these books, and you have to know which parts are going to draw kids in and interest kids. And so, luckily with PAX, it's right from the beginning. So I'll read to you a little bit, just like I would to a classroom of my fifth graders, a little bit from PAX Chapter 1. And what I like about this book is it starts with a quote, and I oftentimes will talk with my kids about what these quotes mean. And this quote is, just because it isn't happening here doesn't mean it isn't happening. And so I would usually pause and maybe ask kids what they thought about that quote, what they thought it meant, and have some discussion around that. So without any further ado, this is chapter 1 from PAX, and I don't know if you can see, but there's a little fox head, which tells us that this chapter is going to be from PAX's perspective. The fox felt the car slow before the boy did, as he felt everything first, through the pads of his paws along his spine and the sensitive whiskers at his wrists. By the vibrations, he learned also that the road had grown coarser. He stretched up from the boy's lap and sniffed at threads of scent leaking in through the window, which told him that they were now traveling into woodlands. The sharp odors of pine, wood, bark, cones, and needles slivered through the air like blades. But beneath that, the fox recognized softer clover and wild garlic and ferns, and also 100 things he had never encountered before, but that smelled green and urgent. The boy sensed something now, too. He pulled his pet back to him and gripped his baseball glove more tightly. The boy's anxiety surprised the fox. The few times they had traveled in the car before, the boy had been calmer, even excited. The fox nudged his muzzle into the glove's webbing, although he hated the leather smell. His boy always laughed when he did this. He would close the glove around the pet's head, play wrestling, and in this way the fox would distract him. But today the boy lifted his pet and buried his face in the fox's white ruff, pressing hard. I would pause here and ask students, what are you thinking right now? What emotions are going through the boy's mind? How is he feeling? How do you know, since he's acting differently, what does that tell us about him as a character? It was then that the fox realized his boy was crying. He twisted around to study his face to be sure. Yes, crying, although without a sound, something the fox had never known him to do. The boy hadn't shed tears for a very long time, but the fox remembered, always, before he cried out, as if to demand that attention be paid to curious occurrence of salty water streaming from his eyes. The fox licked at the tears and then grew more confused. There was no scent of blood. He squirmed out of the boy's arms to inspect his human more carefully, alarmed that he could have failed to notice an injury, although his sense of smell was never wrong. No blood, not even the underskin pooling of a bruise or the marrow leak of a cracked bone, which had happened once. The car pulled to the right, and the suitcase beside them shifted. By its scent, the fox knew it held the boy's clothing and the things from his room he handled most often. The photo he kept on top of his bureau, and the items he hid in the bottom drawer. He pawed at the corner, hoping to pry the suitcase open enough for the boy's weak nose to smell these favored things and to be comforted. But just then the car slowed, this time to a rumbling crawl. The boy slumped forward, his head in his hands. The fox's heartbeat climbed and the brushy hairs of his tail lifted. The charred metal scent of the father's new clothes was burning his throat. He leaped to the window and scratched at it. Sometimes at home, his boy would raise a similar glass wall if he did this. He always felt better when the glass wall was lifted. Instead, the boy pulled him down onto his lap again and spoke to his father in a begging tone. The fox had learned the meaning of many human words, and he heard him use one of them now. No. Often the no word was linked to one of the two names he knew, his own and his boy's. He listened carefully, but today it was just the no pleaded to the father over and over. The car juddered to a full stop and tilted off to the right, a cloud of dust rising beyond the window. The father reached over the seat again, and after saying something to his son in a soft voice that didn't match his hard lie scent, he grasped the fox by the scruff of its neck. His boy did not resist, so the fox did not resist. He hung limp and vulnerable in the man's grasp, although he was now frightened enough to nip. He would not displease his humans today. The father opened the car door and strode over gravel and patchy weeds to the edge of the wood. The boy got out and followed. The father set the fox down, and the fox bounded out of his reach. He locked his gaze onto his two humans, surprised to notice that they were nearly the same height now. The boy had grown very tall recently. The father pointed to the woods. The boy looked out at his father for a long moment, his eyes streaming again. And then he dried his face with the neck of his t-shirt and nodded. He reached into his jean pocket and withdrew an old plastic soldier, the fox's favorite toy. The fox came to alert, ready for the familiar game. His boy would throw the toy, and he would track it down, in a feat that the boy always seemed to find remarkable. He would retrieve the toy and wait with it in his mouth until the boy found him and took it back to toss again. And sure enough, the boy held the toy soldier aloft and then hurled it into the woods. The fox's relief, they were only here to play a game, made him careless. He streaked towards the woods without looking back at the humans. If he had, he would have seen the boy wrench away from his father and cross his arms over his face, and he would have returned. Whatever his boy needed, protection, distraction, affection, he would have offered. Instead, he set off after the toy, finding it was slightly more difficult than usual as there were so many other fresher odors in the woods, but only slightly. After all, the scent of his boy was also on the toy. That scent he could find anywhere. The toy soldier lay face down at the burled root of a butternut tree, as if he had pitched himself there in despair. His rifle, its butt pressed tirelessly against his face, was buried to the hilt in leaf litter. The fox nudged the toy free, took it between his teeth, and rose on his haunches to allow his boy to find him. In the still woods, the only movements were bars of sunlight glinting like green glass through the leafy canopy. He stretched higher. There was no sign of his boy. A prickle of worry shivered up the fox's spine. He dropped the toy and barked. There was no response. He barked again, and again was only answered by silence. If this was a new game, he did not like it. He picked up the toy soldier and began to retrace his trail. As he loped out of the woods, a jay streaked in above him, shrieking. The fox froze, torn. His boy was waiting to play the game, but birds! Hours upon hours he had watched birds from his pen, quivering at the sight of them, slicing the sky as recklessly as the lightning he often saw on summer evenings. The freedom of their flights always mesmerized him. The jay called again, deeper in the forest now, but answered by a chorus of reply. For one more moment the fox hesitated, peering into the trees for another sight of the electric blue wedge. And then behind him he heard a car door slam shut, and then another. He bounded at full speed, heedless of the briars that tore at his cheeks. The car's engine roared to life, and the fox skidded to a stop at the edge of the road. His boy rolled down the window and reached his arms out. And as the car sped away in a pelting spray of gravel, the father cried out the boy's name, "Peter!" And the boy cried out the only other name that the fox knew, "Pax!" That's the end of chapter 1.